On December 13th, 2025, Dick Van Dyke woke up the same way he wakes up every single morning. He opened his eyes, and he started singing. Next to him in bed, his wife Arlene opened her eyes too, and she started singing along. They sang together, laughed together, and then they got up and started their day, just like always. Except this time, it was different, because on December 13th, 2025, Dick Van Dyke turned 100 years old. 100, a full century. Most people his age aren't waking up at all, let alone singing and dancing before breakfast. But Dick Van Dyke isn't most people. At 100 years old, he still goes to the gym 3 times a week. He still does yoga. He can still touch his toes, which amazes his doctors. He still works. He was on television just last year, becoming the oldest Daytime Emmy winner in history. And most remarkably of all, he's still deeply, madly in love with his wife, who, by the way, is 54 years old, 46 years younger than him. Let that sink in for a moment. Dick Van Dyke is 100. His wife is 54. And they wake up every morning singing to each other like teenagers. This is not a story about a man who happened to live a long time. This is a story about a man who chose to live, who chose joy, who chose love, even when the world told him he was too old, even when his own body started breaking down, even when he lost people he loved. Dick Van Dyke kept waking up every morning and singing. This is the story of how he did it, and why, at 100 years old, he has no plans to stop. Let's start at the beginning. Not the beginning of Dick Van Dyke's life, which would take far too long to tell, but the beginning of the secret, the beginning of how a man reaches 100 years old and still has the energy of someone half his age. The secret, according to everyone who knows him, is Arlene Silver, his wife, his partner, the woman 46 years younger than him who, as one filmmaker put it, keeps him singing and dancing every single day. Dick and Arlene met in 2006 at the SAG Awards. He was 80. She was 34. She was working as a makeup artist at the event. He was there as a legend being honored. And according to Dick, the moment he saw her, something clicked. But here's the thing. Arlene had no idea who Dick Van Dyke was. She was too young to have grown up with the Dick Van Dyke Show. She'd never seen Mary Poppins or Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. She just saw a charming older man who made her laugh. They started talking, and they didn't stop. For years, they were friends, just friends. Dick was still grieving the loss of his longtime partner, Michelle Triola, who had died in 2009 after battling lung cancer for a year. Dick had been with Michelle for more than 30 years. Her death devastated him. He didn't think he'd ever love again. But Arlene was there, not pushing, not demanding, just being present, making him laugh, getting him to sing, reminding him that life, even in grief, could still have moments of joy. And slowly, friendship became something more. In 2012, when Dick was 86 and Arlene was 40, they got married. The world had opinions, of course. A 40-year-old woman marrying an 86-year-old man. People said she was after his money. They said it wouldn't last. They said he was too old. Dick and Arlene didn't care. I've got a beautiful young wife who sings and makes me happy, Dick said in an interview, and that was all that mattered. Now, 13 years later, Dick is 100 and Arlene is 54, and they're still waking up every morning singing to each other. But it's not just romance that keeps Dick going. It's routine. It's discipline. It's the daily choice to keep moving. Arlene, according to the documentary filmmaker who just released a tribute to Dick's 100th birthday, is the key. She keeps him active every day, the filmmaker said, singing, dancing, constantly up and moving. I truly believe she's been such an influential force to keep him so vibrant. Every morning starts the same way. Dick wakes up, Arlene wakes up, and they sing, not because they're performing, not because anyone is watching, just because it brings them joy. Sometimes it's a song from one of Dick's old movies. Sometimes it's something they make up on the spot. It doesn't matter what they sing. What matters is that they start every single day with music. After singing, Dick does his exercises. 3 times a week, Arlene makes sure he goes to the gym. She makes sure I go, Dick told an interviewer. If it was up to me, I'd probably skip it, but she doesn't let me. At the gym, Dick does a full workout. Cardio, weights, stretching. His doctors are amazed. Most people at 100 can barely walk. Dick Van Dyke is lifting weights. On the days he doesn't go to the gym, he does yoga at home. He stretches. He moves. And incredibly, at 100 years old, Dick Van Dyke can still touch his toes. They can't believe it, Dick said of his doctors, but I've been doing it my whole life. Why stop now? That attitude, that refusal to stop, is what's kept Dick alive. Not just alive, thriving. When most people retire and slow down, Dick kept working. In 2023, at 97 years old, he appeared on The Masked Singer as the Gnome. He became the oldest contestant in the show's history. He sang Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious as his encore, the same song he made famous in Mary Poppins, almost 60 years earlier. In 2024, he co-produced a music video for Coldplay's song All My Love. The video featured Dick dancing with his children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. At 99 years old, dancing. Still moving, still performing. And just last year, Dick won a Daytime Emmy for a guest role on the soap opera Days of Our Lives. At 98, he became the oldest person ever to win a Daytime Emmy. His acceptance speech? I'll be darned. I think I'm the last of my generation. But here's what makes Dick Van Dyke's story even more remarkable. He didn't always live this way. For years, Dick struggled with alcoholism, with depression, with the feeling that maybe he'd already lived too long. Back in the 1970s and 80s, when Dick was at the height of his fame, he was also at the lowest point of his personal life. He drank heavily. He's been open about it in interviews. I went through that whole period of alcoholism, Dick said in a recent interview. Looking back, if I had known I was going to live this long, I would have taken better care of myself. The drinking got so bad that it almost destroyed his first marriage. Dick was married to his first wife, Margie Willett, for 36 years. They had 4 children together, but the marriage was troubled. Dick's drinking, his long absences for work, the pressure of fame. Eventually, they divorced in 1984. Dick was devastated, not just by the divorce, but by what he'd become. He was one of America's most beloved entertainers, the wholesome guy from The Dick Van Dyke Show, the charming chimney sweep from Mary Poppins. And in private, he was falling apart. But Dick made a choice. He got sober. He stopped drinking, and he started rebuilding his life. In 1976, he met Michelle Triola. She was an actress and singer. They fell in love. And for the next 33 years, Michelle was Dick's partner. She helped him stay sober. She supported his career. She loved him. When Michelle died in 2009, Dick thought that was it. He was 83 years old. He'd lost the love of his life. Most people would have given up. But then Arlene came along, and Dick realized something. It's never too late. It's never too late to fall in love. It's never too late to start over. It's never too late to wake up singing. So what does Dick Van Dyke actually do every day that keeps him going at 100? Let's break it down. Because this isn't magic. This isn't luck. This is discipline. This is choice. Every single morning, Dick wakes up around 6 a.m. The first thing he does, sing with Arlene. They sing together before they even get out of bed. It's their ritual, their way of starting the day with joy. After singing, Dick gets up and does his stretches, yoga poses, flexibility exercises, things that keep his body limber. If I don't stretch, Dick said, everything hurts. So I stretch. 3 mornings a week, Arlene drives Dick to the gym. He does a full workout, cardio to keep his heart strong, light weights to maintain muscle, balance exercises to prevent falls. His trainers are amazed. Most people his age can barely stand, one trainer said. Dick is doing squats. On the days he doesn't go to the gym, Dick practices yoga at home. He's been doing yoga for decades. It's part of why, at 100, he can still touch his toes. After his workout, Dick has breakfast, nothing fancy, oatmeal, fruit, coffee. I'm not on some special diet, Dick said. I just eat normal food. I try not to overdo it. Then Dick spends time with Arlene. They talk, they laugh, they watch their favorite shows. Dick loves Jeopardy! When asked what he wanted to do for his 100th birthday, Dick said, I don't want to do anything. I just want to be in my room watching Jeopardy! Reruns with Arlene. That's it. That's the plan. Watch game shows with the woman he loves. At 100 years old, Dick Van Dyke has learned something most people never figure out. Happiness isn't complicated. It's singing with your wife in the morning. It's stretching so your body doesn't hurt. It's watching Jeopardy! Together at night. It's the small daily choices to keep moving, keep laughing, keep living. Dick Van Dyke's 100th birthday was celebrated all over America. PBS released a documentary called American Masters, starring Dick Van Dyke. Theaters across the country showed a special tribute film, Dick Van Dyke, 100th Celebration. TCM aired a marathon of his classic movies. Mary Poppins, Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, Bye Bye Birdie. Millions of people watched, millions of people remembered, because Dick Van Dyke didn't just entertain us. He shaped our childhoods. He made us believe in magic. He made us think that maybe, just maybe, life could be a musical where you dance on rooftops and fly kites and sing in the rain. And now, at 100 years old, he's teaching us something even more important. That age is just a number. That love doesn't have an expiration date. That you can wake up at 100 and still find reasons to sing. Interviews poured in for Dick's birthday. Everyone wanted to know his secret. How do you live to 100? How do you stay so vibrant? Dick's answers were always the same. I married a beautiful young woman who keeps me on my toes, he said with a laugh. Literally, she makes me exercise. But beyond the jokes, there's real wisdom in what Dick says. I've decided people are born with a certain personality, Dick told an interviewer. I tend to look on the good side of things. That's just who I am. And maybe that's the real secret. Not the gym, not the yoga, not even Arlene, though she's certainly part of it. The secret is choosing to see the good, choosing to find joy, choosing every single morning to wake up singing. Dick published a book for his 100th birthday called 100 Rules for Living to 100, An Optimist's Guide to a Happy Life. One of the rules? Dance your way to the breakfast table. Another? Think how lucky I am. I got to do what I love, play and act silly, for a living. Dick Van Dyke never took life too seriously, even when it was hard, even when he was struggling with alcohol, even when he lost people he loved. He chose to play, to be silly, to find the humor in everything, and that choice kept him alive. There's something profoundly moving about watching Dick Van Dyke at 100, not because he's extraordinary, though he is, but because he's proof. Proof that life doesn't end at 65, or 70, or 80, or even 90. Proof that you can fall in love at 86. Proof that you can start working out in your 90s and still see results. Proof that purpose doesn't have a retirement date. When Dick was asked what he plans to do next, now that he's 100, he said, "The same thing I did yesterday. Wake up, sing with my wife, go to the gym, watch Jeopardy, and tomorrow I'll do it all again." No grand plans, no bucket list, just the daily practice of choosing joy. And maybe that's the lesson. We spend so much time waiting for the big moments, the achievements, the milestones, the things we'll do someday. But Dick Van Dyke, at 100 years old, has figured out what matters. It's not the big moments, it's the mornings, the singing before breakfast, the stretches that keep you limber, the hand you hold at night, the laughter that fills your days. Dick Van Dyke is 100 years old, his wife is 54, and every single morning they wake up singing, not because they have to, not because anyone expects them to, but because they choose to, because after 100 years, Dick Van Dyke has learned the secret. Life is short, even when it's long, so you might as well wake up singing